accessibility, which is led by myself and contributed to by members of my team. So the intention when setting up the group was to centralise and formalise existing pockets of work on accessibility and inclusion, to embed such efforts into the department structure, and to expand and sustainably resource this activity. Although endorsed and supported by senior managers, the group is purposefully led by frontline staff, with the intention that it would be an empowering opportunity for staff to make improvements using their unique insight, knowledge and skills. In our first meeting, we established a purpose statement and aims and objectives, which you can see on the slide here. We also agreed on an annual programme of activities, which would comprise 3 staff workshops and a summer internship. Additional activities have taken place beyond this, but that remains the programme. I'm not going to give a detailed overview of all our activity today because I don't have time, but I've summarised the workshops we've facilitated so far on this slide and also included an image from our first summer internship. In this talk, I'm going to tell you about our second internship project, which was to create sensory maps of all of our public spaces. I really enjoyed hearing your talks about how to make archival content, catalogues, processes, and interpretation diverse and inclusive. But equally, if users struggle to be in our physical spaces, they're going to struggle to access our collections. And so that's my focus today. There were several steps which motivated us to design our second internship around accessibility for neurodiverse users and the creation of sensory maps in particular. First was a neurodiversity awareness session for staff delivered by Francesca Fotheringham, who suggested that we might conduct a walk around of our spaces from the viewpoint of a neurodivergent user to identify and address existing barriers. A group member was in touch with Amy Fletcher, who is an autistic postgraduate researcher at the University of Glasgow. Amy's work focuses on co-creation strategies to make museums more accessible for neurodiverse adults. Her research builds on the existing practice and literature in this space, which has tended to focus on making museums more accessible to neurodiverse children and has not included autistic people in the planning or evaluation stages. And so she was the perfect fit for what we were hoping to do. During the audit, a small group worked our way through each space from the entrance to replicate the visitor experience. We tuned into our senses to identify potential barriers, sensory, physical, informational, and social, noted these down and discussed ways they could be addressed. Following the audit, Amy produced a report which highlighted each barrier or challenge, collated those which were recurring throughout our spaces, and proposed potential solutions. Some were quickly and easily addressed, such as adding foam strips to the inside of our lockers to prevent them from banging shut and startling users. Some are medium long-term and will require additional funding or staff resource, such as improved signage, alternative seating options, and drop-in induction sessions. The primary recommendation of the report, however, was the provision of pre-arrival information, including sensory maps. During the audit, we identified many sensory barriers, including mixed lighting, high noise levels, crowded spaces, and visual distractions. Although the nature of our buildings means we cannot always adjust these, a sensory map would let visitors know what to expect in advance and make their own decisions about whether to visit and at what times. From the strength of the recommendation in Amy's report, we agreed it would make an excellent project. However, we then had to figure out where to start. I'm neurotypical and had never seen or used a sensory map before. Helpfully, Amy had included some links to example maps in her report, and one of these were those at the National Museum of Scotland, which you can see on the slide. I contacted and met with Lindsay Anderson, who had led the project at the NMS and who helpfully talked me through their process. She also kindly agreed to share their sensory symbols with us for use in our maps, both to speed up our own development and to create a common language of symbols for users who may visit both sites. Following this, we developed and proposed a 6-week student internship to create 4 sensory maps of our public sites. By providence, a couple of months before the internship was due to start, an exceptional work experience student was dropped into our labs. A colleague who works in our academic support librarian team had heard about our project and was hosting Marina Gonzalez Figueroa, a library master's student from the University of Strathclyde. Thank you, Strathclyde. Marina had previously created a sensory map for Edinburgh Castle and had also been part of the testing team for the maps at NMS with Lindsay. Subsequently, she spent about a third of her placement with us, creating a draft sensory map for St Cecilia's Music Museum in Edinburgh. This was absolutely invaluable as it allowed us to test the process, create a more accurate timeline for the work, and have a template for our intern to draw from. I was initially concerned that the experience and skill set we were asking for would be too niche for the recruitment pool of University of Edinburgh students, but we had some very strong candidates in the end. And our successful candidate, Ailsa Dixon, was a Scottish ethnology student who is passionate about engaging people with heritage through her work as a traditional storyteller. She had also previously worked at and created a sensory map for John Knox House on the Royal Mile. To ensure we achieved as much as possible, I created a very detailed work plan for the internship, splitting it into these stages: orientation and research, preparation, auditing, testing, redrafting, and reflection and communication. I also scheduled some fun activities for Elsa around that work, so that's her making a book shoe there with one of our conservators. I'm pleased to say we worked through each of these stages during Elsa's time with us, and she produced 4 draft maps. So here are some of the challenges we encountered along the way, both Elsa's and my own. The first was simplifying architectural plans and blueprints. This is what we had to work from initially, and simplifying these into the basic outline of the spaces was complicated and time-consuming. Also, software and upskilling. We created draft maps in Adobe Illustrator, which was not a software I or Elsa had any experience of, but we were lucky to have access to it via the UCreate space, and Elsa was very proactive at watching YouTube videos and teaching herself. Testing, we were lucky to have links to testers through Elsa and Marina's social circles, but coordinating the scheduling of the testing within the tight time frame was tricky. We also did not have any additional funding to pay the testers, but I'll speak a bit more about that in a moment. And finally, supervision. I was very conscious during the project that it was as much of a learning curve for me as it was for Elsa, and I didn't want her to feel any insecurity because of this. I got around this by doing a lot of initial preparation and learning, through open and honest communication with her, problem solving, and letting her take the lead as the one with lived experience of autism. The internship ended in July, and I've just had a first draft of a tidy branded map back from graphic design, so this is what they're going to look like. There's some typos and errors in the text here, but the look is as it will be. So we went with a traffic light system of symbols, which will indicate the noise, lightness levels, areas that are crowded, also areas that are staff only or where staff members might be present. The orientation of the maps is as you would walk about the space, as you would encounter it. We also included this list of good to knows at the front, which is a bit of additional information that you might want to know in advance about the space. And I thought quite hard to have the branding only on the cover page and not on the map itself, so it doesn't kind of interact and distract from the actual information that is there. All 4 maps will be added to our web pages, hopefully in the next month or so, and we hope to continue creating pre-arrival information in different formats to suit different needs. We'll also be reporting back on this process to our higher department EDI group so that we can perhaps expand the maps to other university library spaces. As the maps have not yet been published, we haven't had any feedback other than from Elsa, Marina and the testers. However, Ewan's Guide, which is an Edinburgh-based accessibility charity, published their annual report recently, and for 6,000 respondents, 91% said they tried to find disabled access information before visiting a new space, and a further 62% said that they're more likely to visit somewhere new if the venue appears to care about accessibility. So I think it's safe to say that it will be a positive step. We approached this project from the start with some best practice principles in mind and others we learned along the way. So lived experience, a key commitment for all our work with the Accessibility Working Group is recognising that our own experience is not sufficient and that we will employ individuals with lived or direct experience when undertaking consultations and designing services. That sounds obvious, but Amy's postgraduate research shows us that it's definitely not always the case, so it's worth stating. The second is that we will pay those people who work with us on projects such as this. This is sometimes easier said than done when working with tight budgets. We paid Amy for the audit and to be on the interview panel, and we paid Elsa for her internship. However, Marina was not paid as working on the map was part of her work experience project. This was a tension not expressed by Marina but felt by myself, which we tried to mitigate by ensuring that the experience she gained was helpful to her long-term career goals. And it's actually a question that my colleagues Danielle and Elin will be considering more in depth in their talk on volunteering in just a second. We also weren't able to pay the testers, but we did provide book vouchers as a thank you. We consciously considered accessibility during the recruitment phase. One of the criteria for the internship was an in-depth understanding of the neurodiverse experience, as we wanted to ensure that the work was being undertaken by a person with lived experience of neurodiversity. We provided interview questions in advance of standard, chose a quiet space with adjustable lighting for the interviews, and offered the successful candidate the chance to visit the work environment ahead of time to ensure they would be comfortable. And we received some really positive feedback from the candidates, which you can see on the slide. Hopefully the sensory maps will now make all future recruitment for all posts even more accessible, as we can provide those to candidates in advance. Testing, you'll never be able to represent everyone's perspective in one map, and there will always be things in there that aren't applicable to everyone, but a robust testing stage will ensure it helps as many people as possible. Intersectionality, whilst this project was primarily about addressing factors that impact neurodiverse visitors, it was important to consider barriers more widely due to many neurodiverse people also experiencing co-occurring physical disabilities. By using an intersectional lens partnered with a universal design approach, projects can be mindful of overlapping access needs and impact as many people as possible. And we've talked a lot about collaboration today, so knowledge sharing this project would not have been possible at all without the support of colleagues and peers internally and externally, from the generosity of Lindsay and the NMS team and having conversations with the academic support librarian team that led them to match us with Marina. It's important for us to talk about the work we are doing and also aspiring to do, even before it's a reality. If we'd waited until this was shiny and done before having these conversations, we would have missed out on resources and likely made a lot of errors, a lot more errors on the way. To that end, I've highlighted some similar work I'm aware of in other institutions on this slide for the text assessment. I will close by saying that ultimately you could have the most exciting, diverse and inclusive collections and the most innovative services in the world, and yet it could be the simplest thing that prevents your potential user from actually getting through the door to engage with them. So a targeted focus on the accessibility and provision of pre-arrival information such as sensory maps is a crucial step to ensuring that everyone who wants to engage can. Thank you for listening. I'd be happy to answer any questions now later. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Caroline, Rachel, and everyone for having us. It's been so interesting so far. But we are the two archive and library assistants who are based full-time at the New College Library, University of Edinburgh. We run the Frank Reading Room. We sit within the Heritage Collections Department, which is pretty massive. It's a combined archive, libraries and museum service with 70-something staff across 5 or 6 sites around the city. So we're just a tiny little offshoot of the library. Frank Reading Room has only been up and running for 9 months, and setting up this new space has given us some really interesting opportunities to review our practices and approaches to volunteering and to student contribution projects. Who are we as well? Well, we're both early career professionals. We have postgraduate degrees in related studies, literature and curation for me, and linguistics for Danny. I've been in my current role for coming up to 3 years, and Danny for just over a year, but we've fulfilled a number of paid intern and volunteering positions within Heritage Collections before becoming permanent members of staff. We're speaking today about volunteering and our experiences setting up productive volunteering opportunities, because volunteering is such a massive part of working in museums, archives and libraries, and such a core part of our experience so far.
So as we start to set up volunteer opportunities in the Reading Room at New College, we thought it would be good to review the guidance offered by professional bodies, such as the Archives and Records Association, or ARA, and the Chartered Institute of Library and Informational Professionals, or CILIP. So CILIP and ARA both recognize the valuable role of volunteers in supporting library and record keeping services, and they acknowledge that volunteering is a great way to gain new experience and skills needed to progress in your career. So CILIP has a very clear use of volunteers policy posted on its website, which advocates that trained professionals are essential for delivering quality services, and that the use of volunteers should not be a substitute for paid qualified care. They stress that while volunteers provide valuable additional support, they should not undertake core service roles, as this eventually could hurt the sector overall. So I didn't see an equivalent statement for ARA about volunteering, but their website is generally encouraging volunteer involvement. They point organizations recruiting volunteers to guidelines set out by the Forum for Archive and Records Management, Education and Research. These guidelines are mostly specific to people looking for placements in combination with further study, but they also offer general advice on structuring volunteer programs. They emphasize giving volunteers exposure to a variety of essential tasks aimed at developing the volunteers' understanding of the archive sector. They also advocate for prioritizing the quality of the experience over the length of the time commitment. So in other words, a short-term placement that offers exposure to a variety of tasks is often more valuable than a long-term placement with routine structure. So additionally, it stresses the need for transferable skills like communication, critical thinking, and teamwork, which are vital for future professionals in the field. So we found both of these views very helpful as we set up our own volunteer opportunities, and have especially appreciated the practical advice offered by ARA.
Yeah, we've had a few volunteering and student contribution projects in the Frank Reading Room already. These have been in conjunction with students who wish to develop skills in collections handling and to get an introduction to archives. For example, we had in a School of Divinity Master student who visited 3 times, no more than about 8 hours of his time total, and the outcome was he created a basic box list as part of one of his assessments. This was for a small run of regionally distinct material that was from an area that he had a personal connection with, and our archivist will be able to use it to inform future finding aids and description. This was the student's first encounter with an archive and with working with primary sources, and he's since returned to work on his dissertation using our material, so clearly his time spent in our reading room as a component of this course inspired further research and made him feel comfortable to visit again. We've also had one student who's been volunteering with Heritage Collections for over 3 years now. She's been working on several different projects, but main ones, New College Collections, was with Thomas Chalmers papers, adding name authorities to the online catalogue to make the collection more searchable and accessible. She has an incredible success rate for facilitating early research. Several times now, a researcher has emailed us within 24 hours of a new authority going up online because it's just the thing that they need for their project. However, this volunteering scenario does lead to some uncomfortable situations. The student is volunteering in partial fulfilment of a Master's in Archives and Records Management at the University of Dundee, and that's the same course that I'm doing too. We started the programme at the same time together, and we're regularly on online classes together. It's a requirement of the course that the student must be either volunteering or working in an archive at least a half day per week. So when the student volunteer is in and working with us, we're both fulfilling the same course requirement. I'm paid to invigilate her slot in the reading room, and she is performing unpaid improvements to our catalogue. When we were discussing the topic and putting forward a paper for this conference, I reached out to one of the senior lecturers teaching our programme at Dundee to learn more about the reason behind this volunteering or working component. They were super lovely and helpful and passed on that, among other reasons, volunteering for experience was included in the course framework to avoid limiting the eligible students to just the few who can secure paid work in such a competitive field. The idea was not to delineate whose experience is valid and whose isn't simply because one is unpaid. This is something that we can completely understand and appreciate, and is similar to our own research and access policy. We never place a judgment on research. We'd never say they're just a student researcher or they're just doing family history. Every visitor in our reading room gets an equitable share of our time and can access all of our resources. I find it reassuring to know that institutions aren't gatekeeping valid experience for the sake of job titles, as not everyone can afford, in terms of finances and or time, to take a relatively low-paying and 100% in-person paraprofessional job like our own while they're studying for further qualification. If they're coming into the heritage sector while already working, or while juggling other commitments, then half-day volunteering might be a much more feasible option. I am confident, though, that this is not a concern limited to the New College, the University of Edinburgh, or the University of Dundee. I had a quick survey of other ARA accredited postgrad qualifications, and most of them have a similar volunteering or working requirement, either before the course to get grounding in the sector, or during the course to provide evidence of experience. Some of the in-person courses do substitute a work placement for in-person practical teaching or in-person summer school type sessions. Others have quantitative time-based requirements, such as 400 hours of relevant work experience and regular volunteering. This is not the kind that Dundee encourages. The senior lecturer I was speaking with advocated for the kind of volunteering that Danny outlined by ARA, where a flexible and targeted volunteering role provides more access and scope for learning than the more rigid paid one. And this is certainly true in my experience as well. Strictly speaking, my role at New College is to field inquiries and to facilitate reading room consultations, not to learn more about the archival profession. Though I can come to events like this because my colleagues are really wonderful and make time for me, and my supervisors really encourage professional development. At the end of the day, though, I do feel very lucky that I can fulfil my programme component and pay my bills at the same time, as not everyone can manage it. Generally, I do believe that everyone's time and work is worthwhile and people should be fairly paid for their labour. It's often a talking point in art and museums in terms of co-curation, feminist critical theory and participatory research, and I think we should be discussing it more in archives and libraries too. We don't really have time to cover it more today, but here's some papers I've been reading about it recently in terms of compensating people for their contribution, whether that's financial or through other means such as community support or experiential learning. Volunteering can be a skills investment, but in the short term, acquiring it as a component of education really can exclude those with financial barriers, physical access barriers, and time commitments such as caring responsibilities. I don't have a solution for this, but I think it's a really important conversation to keep in mind so that it's
So with all of this in mind, we wanted to make sure that when it came time to develop our own volunteer opportunities in the Funk Reading Room, that we were as inclusive and mutually beneficial, that they were as inclusive and mutually beneficial to both parties. We've been working with collections management technician Jasmine Hyde, Scottish and University Collections archivist Kirsty Stewart, who you might have seen here earlier, and student engagement officer Serena Frederick to develop the project, which will center around rehousing some of our archives in new archival grade boxes and folders. So naturally, there were some limitations on how flexible our project could be. So for example, it had to be an in-person project that took place Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. means that it could be difficult for some people to take advantage of this opportunity, especially if they have other jobs or caring responsibilities. But we do know that Heritage Collections offers other more diverse volunteer options. So we're hoping that those that would find this timeframe hard to accommodate would consider other projects. So to combat this, we decided to schedule around a gap in teaching on Wednesday afternoon, so that in theory, most applicants would be able to participate, as many would be students. When figuring out the nuts and bolts of the project, we had a few things in mind. So the first thing was that we needed a project that would give the volunteers transferable skills that would help them in their future careers. In other words, something that would be helpful to them. So we knew this project should involve handling training to help volunteers gain knowledge and confidence when they encounter heritage materials. This is often a huge barrier to getting an internship or even an entry-level job, and some baseline experience is often required, but it can be difficult to come by. So rehousing archives provides an excellent opportunity to gain this skill. The second was that we needed the project to be something that would be helpful to our team at New College, as well as the wider team at Heritage Collections. So in other words, something that is helpful, beneficial for our team. So collections management is a huge job for any institution, and New College is no exception. We've been working hard to rehouse our archives to ensure their long-term safety and preservation. It offers a great opportunity to include volunteers as they get to interact firsthand with the materials, gaining insight into both the collections themselves as well as the organizational structure of archives. So the third thing we had in mind was that the project needed to have a clear start and finish with achievable goals that ideally could take place over 6 to 8 weeks within the semester. So that's this point is key. We really wanted volunteers to come away with a strong sense of accomplishment. We wanted to make sure that they have tangible takeaways and relevant experience that they can point to when they're applying for jobs or internships. And we also wanted to make sure that the time commitment wasn't too arduous and that it was well defined so that expectations could be managed on both sides. It was also important that the work was somewhat contained for us so that it didn't inadvertently spawn more work for ourselves or more teams as we got into the project. So the project needed to be carefully considered within the context of the larger work of the university and the nature of the collections. So we aim to start our volunteer project in spring 2025. And at this point in the planning, we really value input from others on how they have balanced the positive and negative sides of engaging unpaid volunteers in collection work, and the impact that this may have had on inclusion and diversity in their institutions. So if you recently set up a volunteering project or have been wrestling with these issues, we'd love to have a chat with you afterwards, so please come find us. Thanks for listening.
Good, it has come up all right. So the title comes from what I was always referred to at school, like being the only person of colour, the only brown person in the class was me. So it'd be, oh, right, that's the coloured girl, it's the coloured girl. So I think we can all agree that my hair has improved over time. So this is me through the ages. It'll show you how elderly I am, and at least a couple of people in this room remember me from that central picture. I'm sorry to say. So half caste, coloured, mixed race, BAME. I think if you're from the States, you refer to, or you would say BIPOC, sort of Black Indigenous person of colour, and then sort of person of colour seems to be coming in now. I've also realised in the past couple of years that I seem to have become South Asian, a place I've never been to. So this terminology, of course, is not new. So the changes. I'm also ancient enough to remember when it was Help the Aged and the sort of spastic society. But if you can see the census in the bottom corner, many of you if you're from the UK, will certainly be familiar with the requirement to decide whether somebody was blind, an imbecile, an idiot, a lunatic, and those kind of pejorative terms. So whatever was the intention, which was a government tool, planning tool, they became insults, and we've all probably heard that sort of on the spectrum as an insult today. Reclaiming words, it's possible to reclaim them, to have them back. So communities have said, right, well, we won't put up with this. People who have been called queer as an insult have started sort of many years ago to reclaim that word and say, no, it's our word, we want it. So whose language is it anyway? So the ownership of the words, who is using them and why? So is this a description that people use of themselves? Did anybody actually describe themselves as half caste? So when people say, oh, where are you from? I know that what lies behind that question is, why do you look like you do? So I tend to answer with a bit of family history, which is why I've got my mum and dad there on the slide. So I describe myself as mixed race. This isn't a term I've come up with. What I mean is that's the box I tick on the form. So I go, oh, my dad's Indian and my mum's English, and people go, oh, right, okay. Yes, I understand you now. So who decides what is correct? I'm often asked what is correct. So who decides what the term should be? And we've got a little list here. So individuals, governments, a range of people. So we could say that we all do. But at the bottom, which I should probably put in bold, are your archivists and your record keepers. So we decide, and we decide, as people have said in the previous presentations, is in our catalogues, that is how people will be remembered. So perhaps we are the most important people for deciding, because we decide in perpetuity. And perhaps we should sometimes revisit that. Why do we need to decide at all? There are my grandparents there. I've done a fair bit of family history. Thanks to my mum, largely. I'm not that interested in it. So planning, the origin of the census was a tool for government. So it's quite magical to see grandparents on the census. So it's not a fascinating resource at all. It's just, you know, how many idiots do we need to plan for in the future? A lot. So there's the evidence that we're reaching all communities. So as we've heard from the Millie project, from a range of you, it's like, who are we reaching? Who are we not reaching? Why are people not here? Funding. Anybody ever done a funding bid? Yes. So who are you bid for? Who is your project for? How many people of colour are you going to reach? How many disabled people come in as a result? You know, are you going to have this type of person or that type of person? That, you know, show your success in this way. And of course, many of you in the room now are academics. So to research, we have to define, like, what are the parameters of the study? How am I going to define the people or the organisations or the topic that I'm researching? And then finally, we've got othering, which many people in this room certainly will have experienced, so that they are not like us. So we've defined certain people as being not like us. And I don't exclude people doing that with the best of intentions either. So what has changed, other than terminology and my hair, in the past decades? So there have been changes to terminology. And as with the othering, we talked about communities who are socially excluded, hard to reach. What we mean is that our services are finding them hard to reach. The communities might be going, well, you know, we're here. We've been here for many years. Why are you finding us hard to reach? Now we talk about engagement. Is that better? I don't honestly know. But we have more of a recognition of community archives, that archive services are not something, hopefully, that is now done to a community, but done with them. Rise of online resources and remote users. How do we know about the community of remote users? We've got no idea of how many of them are disabled or gay or transgender or people of colour, or, you know, even sometimes where they are. The dreaded lottery and project funding has certainly increased, but this has led to more sort of uncertainty, I think. So many of you are here today because of project funding. Also, student debt and the cost of living. It is a significant investment now to work in archives or record keeping. What hasn't changed? Well, we haven't seen a huge difference over the time I've been in archives, and over my lifetime, I would say. In people working in archives are 97% from white ethnic backgrounds, and these figures come from Archives and Records Association studies, surveys of visitors to British archives. So if you're from another country, you may find this to be true, you may find this to not be true. I would be interested. So most of our visitors, most of our volunteers, and most of us are from white ethnic backgrounds. Now I'm focusing on the ethnicity side because it's something that I can talk about from lived experience. People who are, we know people who are disabled find it very, very difficult to work in record keeping. Partly because there certainly used to be, and there still is, I think, silently a physical requirement that you have to be able to lift and carry boxes. I work in information management now, but when I was running a service, I would be lucky if I saw an archive box from week to week. So is that realistic? Possibly not. I would say progress has been very slow and hard to detect. Performance indicators, so what our managers want to see, are based on physical use of the service. They don't care about millions of people that are clicking on your website. And also job insecurity and austerity, and several of our speakers have mentioned this, the project funded roles, the difficulty of getting any stability in your life. So some things have changed, some things haven't, but is it mostly terminology that's changed? Right, who knows who this is? So, this is Joseph Merrick. I do a separate talk on him, don't worry, who was better known in his lifetime as the Elephant Man. Now, probably he had not thought that he would like to be known as that. I did not sort of pick being called the coloured girl at school. He would probably have preferred to be called Mr. Merrick, you know, or Joe to his friends. And it makes little sense to change our terminology without changing our approach. So perhaps we need to think differently before that can happen. Do we consider how different people would describe themselves? And are we just nervous about what to say, about what is correct? How many of you sort of recognise that face in the picture that think, oh yes, this is me? 2 minutes. I'm often asked what is correct, as though I'm some kind of arbiter, like, you know, you're an ethnic person, you'll know what to say. Like, is it right to say this? Can we say deaf now? Do we say gay? I'm so worried about getting it wrong that we perhaps don't say or do anything. And when we're uncomfortable, we perhaps try and seek out the familiar. So I would say to all those, I've no idea that whether we say ethnic minority, whether we say person of colour, I can only tell you what I would like or not like. So if there's one thing I would say is like, listen to what people are telling you. So my personal view is it's always right to want to do better. So the superhero is Batman. Why is it Batman? Well, he's my favourite. Now, he doesn't have any superpowers. He's made his superpowers. He's a billionaire, but as we know, not all billionaires are diversity champions, are they? If we can think of any billionaires, you know, might be. But yes, he's decided he wants to do better. He's very flawed. He's really problematic, but he gets up every day and he wants to change things. So make diversity part of every day. Engage with someone not like you, even someone you might dislike. Try new food. That's always a fun one. You know, or read an article and try and listen with an open mind. Ask people what they would like to be called. Try not to be defensive. Try and open your mind and think it's not about me, it's about somebody else. And in summary, be a superhero. Thank you. I'll now hand over to the straight white man. Even else doing.
So apparently the last word for the afternoon has gone to another white guy with a beard. Sorry. This is me. I am middle-aged. I am middle class. I am a middle manager. If I'm middle of the road, it is a very wide and weird road that I'm the middle of. So that last bit probably isn't right. At the beginning of this century, I left the private sector to join the third sector, and try and make a difference. I was quite pleased with that. And one of the first things we did was equality training. I was really, really looking forward to it. Oh dear. Those of you of age will remember ISO 9001, or investors in people, EDI training, diversity and stuff. Then was something you had to do. And the training we received was a tick list. It didn't help me. It didn't give me any tools. It left me frustrated and a little bit angry, to be honest. And I did some white man things. Statistics. We've seen a lot of statistics. Jenny said that 97% of archivists are ethnically white in the UK. That's all right. 97% of the UK is ethnically white. Right? No, not right. What about racism? Again, Jenny touched on this. There aren't many disabled archivists because what about the fact you've got to go up ladders, get down boxes, and what about? And in the corner is the terrible sea lion, and I didn't really do this, thankfully. This is something that's happened online, and it's a bullying method where somebody will turn up and ask a very polite question about something they disagree with. And they won't listen to the answer at all. They'll just ask the question again and again and again until the people, usually women, usually minorities, get away. Fortunately for me, things changed. The scales did not fall from my eyes like in this picture. It was a step-by-step process that took a while. Main thing for me was about understanding why, who used language, what that language meant. And if there is, I've said there wasn't one moment, it was close to one moment, and that was the terrible disaster that was 2014, where the country just shot itself in the foot for no good reason. It's 2016, so 2 years out. I returned to the language of hope, international language Esperanto, written by this gentleman, Dr. Ludwig Lazar-Zamenhof. The bit you can't really read unless you're an Esperantist says that a neutral language is a fundamental thing to tear down walls between people. And this was the idea. It was mentioned in the University of Glasgow thing about how we share the language. Some of the differences would disappear. I'm not dive off on a tangent here, but this has allowed me to become functionally bilingual, and all the people in this room that speak more than one language will know that that changes your perspective on your everyday life. You look at things, you think that I say that way, or I say that, and that, which is quite important. And because of that, I started using more gender neutral language, and some of the experiences I had were quite interesting. When I was a manager, a lot of people assumed I was talking about a man. When I said colleague, a lot of people assumed I was talking about a woman. And why? Well, I do, but you know. And then there's a singular they. Oh, that upsets people, doesn't it? It's not English. Well, Shakespeare and Austen thought it was pretty good English, so I'm with them. I like to use it. There's a couple of other theys on there as well. We've got singular they, and then we've got an inclusive they. So when I go home and I talk about this conference at work, I'm probably going to refer to all of you as they, the conference attendees. So we're all very group. And then the bottom corner is the one we don't like, the exclusive they. They do things like that. We don't, they do. So again, we've got this movement of language where we're doing things slightly differently. Which brings us back to badger training and how language has changed. The P word, the dreaded, I am privileged. I've got good education, like most of the people in here. I've got a nice, comfortable life. I don't get stopped driving my car down the street for no reason. I am privileged. But there's a lot of bad training about privilege. I was in some about 6 months ago, where people were told to step forward, backward, depending on their life experiences. Didn't tell them what to do with their privilege. Didn't tell you how to use your privilege to help people less privileged than you. It just told you that you were privileged. I didn't choose to be privileged. It just happened. And what I want to see is people in my position using the P word to pull off people that aren't privileged. So this change in language, I think, leads to a lot of confusion. And there are things I don't get. I'm sorry to any non-binary people in the room, but I don't understand it. And what I did find out is that doesn't hugely matter as long as I respect you as a non-binary person. If you tell me your pronouns are they, them, I'll happily use them. I won't ask you weird questions about what being non-binary means, because that's up to you. If you want to tell me, I will listen to you. That's where we get to. The equality and inclusivity is quite simple. It's about listening. It's about being responsible. It's about trying not to be defensive because you've not had that experience. Unfortunately, just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. I did say I was a little bit eccentric. This is me on my way to work. Yes, that is a unicycle. And this is an indication, really. Unicycle is not easy, and diversity and inclusivity is not easy. I've heard a lot about data and metadata, and I've seen the problematic catalogues. Diary of a Japanese, I think, was one that stuck out. And there's a lot of work for people to do, and especially a lot of work for people like me, because I'm going to have to accept some uncomfortable truths, and that is not easy. So that's really my experience of equalities and diversities. I'm the audience for a lot of the things that have been talked about. I'm the person talking to, but over time I've learned, and I hope I keep learning, that I'm an important part of the process to try and help those that need the help.